All right. Good morning, everyone. I think we're going to go ahead and get started. I know Secretary Navarro, one of our speakers, is still en route, but I don't want to lose any time because I know we're all under time pressure, so I'm kind of used to this as a talk. So we'll just roll with the flow here. I'm Dirk Forrester. I'm the president and CEO of IETA, International Emissions Trading Association. We are delighted to team up, as we do often around the globe, with Conservation International in a really special discussion today about the role of nature in carbon markets, be it voluntary or compliance. And really, I think from the IETA perspective, it's part of our shared vision of our community that to reach net zero, we've got to make the net really work. And part of what the net is about is cooperating across borders. It's also cooperating across sectors, and it's also cooperating in terms of the role of nature and peoples that live in communities that benefit from nature-based solutions, and then really having all of the tools in the toolkit for reaching our net zero goals. And I'll just say, as an opening perspective for IETA, one of our observations has been in the places that there are compliance markets that accept nature-based credits, companies are able to invest with confidence around those. And we've seen in California is a great example of it, where it's a statewide cap and trade program covering, I think, 85% of the state's economy. But there's a role for nature-based solutions in that market, and companies in California or that service that market have been able to mobilize hundreds of millions of dollars in protection of natural assets and bringing those to market. And in places where we don't have government regulation, it's been a little more challenging, but nonetheless, I think there are many companies that are committed to getting to their own net zero goals that see a role for nature. So I just wanted to set the stage with that as a little bit of a backdrop, but I want to offer an opening prospect for all of our panelists who give their views on this, sort of from whatever perspective they bring. And we've got a varied group here. We've got government, we've got NGO, we've got standard setters, and we've got private sector, private enterprise. And so I'm going to start with the softball, but we're really privileged to have Lord Alok Sharma with us, who many of us looked up to in Glasgow as the grand architect of all that was achieved. And certainly for us in carbon markets, it was a turning point. And would love to get just an opening perspective, knowing your care for the climate overall, of how markets and nature may interact in getting us where we need to go. So Lord Sharma, let's begin with you. Okay,
thank you so much for that really fine introduction. And can I start by saying that, yes, we managed to get quite a lot over the line at COP26, but it was a UK effort working with friends. But I have to admit that I thought we had cracked Article 6. We hadn't, really. I mean, I was told at the time that it was just a bit of technical work left now, and that would happen during the presidency here. But here we are. We've finally got some agreement on 6.4 here. Just a wider piece on nature and carbon markets. I mean, friends, we know that in terms of the gap on nature finance, we're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars. That is not going to come from public finance. So we're going to have to find other ways of raising that money. And in my view, carbon markets, carbon credits absolutely is a way of making that happen. And we've talked about places like California, where there's you can see there's integrity in the carbon credits where it does work. But I think we also have to be honest with ourselves, is that on the voluntary side, a few years ago, people like BCG and others were predicting we would be ending up with a sort of $50 billion market in a few years. That's not where we are. I mean, if I give you some stats in 2021, I think it was 2.1 billion. And unfortunately, it's gone backwards. So last year it was around 700 plus million. And that shows you that something isn't working in the system. And what's not working in the system is, having the confidence in terms of the integrity of the carbon markets that they're on, whether there really is additionality in the system, and basically transparency as well in terms of how these carbon credits are being put together. Now, I know we're going to, I'm sure, hear about the core principles on the voluntary side, which is great. But I think we somehow need to get that confidence back into the voluntary carbon markets. And maybe it is by getting people to adhere to these core principles that we will get there. But the other thing I would say more generally is I do think that we need to, what we cannot allow is for some companies to use carbon credits as a way of not then working on overall emissions reductions. And one of the things that's tainted the voluntary carbon markets when you have some oil and gas companies coming up and saying, we've got, clean gas for you, and the basis of that is that they're going to buy a whole bunch of carbon credits. We really have to be very honest about what it is that we are putting together as a carbon credit. So that's on the voluntary side, and I know we'll hear more about that. On the basically the regulated market, a bit like that. Obviously, there's been progress here at COP29, and I'd be interested to hear the views of my fellow panelists in terms of what they make of what was agreed. Now, look, it's been 9 years in the making, and I just think nothing is ever going to be perfect, and maybe we just need to give things a go. We've got these guidelines that are now sort of being adopted, but that's not the end of it, because now the party have said, well, give us a bit more detail on the guidelines. We don't know exactly how this will work. So what my one sort of big ask of this COP process, it is incredibly frustrating, but please can we just get on with it and actually set out a mechanism that actually works? And it won't be perfect, and we will go through iterations, but that's fine. Let's just start with the process. We can't wait another 9 years.
You're exactly right. And maybe we need to send you into a room on the other side of the hall to deliver this.
I'm ready, Dad. I'm ready.
I think that's really sums up some of the frustration that's built up in the private sector, partly around the concerns of trust, but also the concerns about we do need to get on with it, and you got to start somewhere. And right now, for many of them, it feels like you're damned if you do and damned if you don't. So why invest the money? But of course, that's not good for the planet. So we've got to get around this. Okay, so I was going to introduce Secretary Garcia next, but she's not here yet. So I think, Patricia, I'm going to come to you next. Patricia Burita from Conservation International, Chief Strategy Officer. We're fellow travelers in this space, us on the business side, and you guys on the conservation community side. Give us your opening perspective on how these two important pieces of markets and nature can fit together to actually accelerate the quest for net zero.
Thank you so much for having me. And I mean, I couldn't agree more. We have to get on with it now as quickly as possible, because God knows we don't have time. From the conservation community and from environment and looking at nature as a 30% of the solution, we're incredibly frustrated that only 3% of the financing is there for nature, which is, I mean, let's get real. If we really want to solve this, we have to put the money on the table, and the market is definitely one way of making it happen. I agree 100% with you. The market on nature in particular has to be the residual carbon that companies and governments cannot reduce on their own footprint. But at the same time, I think, and I go back to what you said in terms of we have to start trusting that this is a nascent market, and we talked about this with Fred the other day. We are pretending that a nascent market is going to have all of the standards and the perfection of a normal market that has been around for more than 200 years, right? And I don't know how we are not making these connections and understanding that we have to give it a go, and that we have to start learning from our mistakes, that we will make mistakes, but that there's also really good things happening. And we cannot allow, and in this case, I'm going to say it, we cannot allow the media to just pick a handful of bad apples to qualify the whole market. it's unfair, it's not right, and that doesn't mean that we don't want high integrity. Let me be very, very clear. We want absolutely high integrity, not only in terms of protecting and restoring nature, but enabling finance get to the hands of local communities and indigenous people who are the stewards of many of these cases. But that doesn't mean that we are going to get into the position of qualifying the market as a failure just because of a handful of bad projects, okay? I think we have to get honest about how important it is to get on with it, learn from the mistakes, acknowledge them, but also make sure that we're really creating that pipeline and that volume that allow us to really use nature as a solution, as the solution that it is going to be. So we welcome the decision that happened on Monday. I agree the framework is it's a good sign in the right direction. We're not there yet in terms of all of the details, and we really want clear guidelines. And from Conservation International, we'll continue to contribute and support the definition of the guidelines. But at the same time, we have to start looking into how can we give this a push? How can we start building up that pipeline and that volume that can allow us to really get things moving? Because nature cannot be a second-class solution. We are 30% of the solution already, and unless we actually start putting the money on that nature solution, we're never going to be able to mathematically address the problem. So the huge advantage that we have when we're looking at nature as a solution is that we're not only putting money on a carbon solution and a climate solution, we're putting money on the foundation that helps the economy function. We don't realize that without nature, we don't have an economy. You know, the report of the web that came up a couple of years ago that said that 50% of the GDP of the world depends heavily on nature, failed to say that the other 50% depends somewhat from nature. Everything in the economy depends on nature. So when you're investing in climate solutions that are based on nature, you're investing on climate, you're investing in the foundation of our economy, and you're investing when you are actually giving access to local communities and indigenous people, you're investing on the people and giving options and justice to the people who can have a huge role contributing to the climate solution. So it's a win-win-win. And I would say we just have to get on it and get on with it and make sure that we are actually mobilizing a market that is going to benefit our future, the planet, and local communities.
And I just say, sort of underneath all of this, one of the great things about these nature projects is that oftentimes they involve collaborations between businesses and groups like yours, and that gives it a stability and a local acceptance that you don't always get in an average carbon project. So congrats to CI for some of the great work you guys are doing. The topic about quality has come up, and so Fred, if it's okay with you, I'm going to turn to Doris next, because we're lucky to have Doris Hunt here from the governing board of the Integrity Council for the Voluntary Carbon Market. This is one of the many acronyms in the voluntary carbon market, but one that's very important to us because it's been hard at work setting a threshold standard grew out of the Glasgow negotiations earlier, the lead into the Glasgow negotiations, and something that I think the business community paid a lot of attention to, but also you've had a breakthrough this week. We'd love to hear about that, of how the work of the Integrity Council may provide some additional quality assurance. So Doris, please.
Thanks, Doug, and great to be here. And you know, I agree with everything my panelists have said before. You know, we will not achieve our climate targets without nature. Nature is critical. We know that. We know the 30%. We know what the solutions are: reforestations, afforestations, mangroves, agriculture methodology. So we have the solutions. So we need a way to make the finance work. Carbon markets is one potential solution with all the criticism we heard about. And you know, I thought if there was a price for the ratio of negative press over size of the market, the carbon market would get this trophy every year for the last 5 years. So there is something on we deserve scrutiny, but really so much energy on something that is nascent and, as you say, is growing and is learning and is iterating. With this new the Integrity Council for the Voluntary Carbon Market established an assessment framework for carbon principles with the aim of creating a global minimum threshold for quality. We are approving verifying bodies and standards, and as Dirk alluded to, today was a big day for us because we announced the approval of 3 nature-based methodologies. That's the R-TREES 2.0, that's VM48, and the Vera jurisdictional nested red. So we're very excited about that. I think it shows how important nature is. The nature projects have probably been the most criticized, but we have seen so much improvement on every level, on the benchmark setting, on the robustness of the quantifications, et cetera, that we are really confident that these new methodologies are robust and hopefully contribute to reestablishing trust in the market that's so critical for growth. Maybe one more point: no issues have yet been no projects have yet been credited under these methodologies, so there are no immediate CCP labels. However, there are hundreds of millions of projects in the pipeline with the verifying bodies, and as soon as they have done their assurance on the new methodologies and the credits are issued, they will receive the CCP label immediately. So very soon we will have the first nature-based CCPs in the market, and that's just fantastic.
It's a tremendous breakthrough. Thank you for that. And we'll give a clip for our Integrity Campus. It's been a long time coming because it's taken the time to try to do it right, and greatly appreciate that.
Thank you.
Yeah. And Secretary Garcia, thank you for persevering and finding us here in the back parts of the corridor. I'm happy to recognize you next. I think you caught your breath, so but right before you got here, I sort of opened this in talking about how California has been a bit of a model for us in the carbon market community, of an example to point to was the compliance market that includes government sanctioned carbon credits from nature. And in fact, in California, when we do forums like this in California, some of the communities that come forward that are most enthusiastic about it are tribal communities that have used this to their advantage. But I didn't want this to be a complete conversation about voluntary. Give us a little taste of your experience and kind of how California sees the role of nature-based solutions in its path to net zero.
Thank you, and a pleasure to be here with all of you, and especially the esteemed colleagues on this panel. So first and foremost, I just want to start by acknowledging that our industry-wide, economy-wide path to carbon neutrality has iterated itself to now include our natural working lands and the leveraging of the deployment of nature-based solutions. It's historically not been the case that we've so specifically included the benefits of nature-based solutions. But just earlier this year, we actually launched 81 nature-based solutions as part of our strategy to achieve carbon neutrality by 2045. That strategy has long been focused on industrial sources of emissions and ratcheting those down quite significantly, an 85% reduction below 1990 levels by 2035 as well. So we're well on the way toward making progress to our goals. But through our cap and trade program and also through thinking about carbon offsets at the global level as well as in California, we've made real progress in setting, I think, an important standard in measuring permanent, additional, quantifiable, and enforceable carbon offsets that are focused on compliance markets, not voluntary markets within California. So I want to talk a little bit about, you know, some of the benefits that we've seen from the deployment of this program. So one of our 6 offset protocols, the U.S. Forestry Offset Protocol, has been used to date to store over 200 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalents for projects across the United States. We're extremely proud of this. And we've made quite an effort over the past several years as we've been refining our approach to ensure that many of the benefits of this program are also, you know, as much as they're providing benefits globally, are providing benefits that are being felt for California communities and for U.S. communities as well. Among dozens of the other programs and incentives, our compliance offsets have helped to fund activities that advance nature solutions, obviously across the globe. But we need to keep the integrity of our carbon market, I think, first and foremost. And I want to just note that in addition to being real, permanent, additional, and quantifiable, it's also critical to implement offset standards for equity and community involvement. You know, you mentioned the benefit that can be felt by Indigenous community, and this has been key for us. We've had a lot of success talking to our Brazilian colleagues and many others throughout developing nations who are also looking at leveraging this type of focus on equity and community involvement in addition to the enforceability, quantifiability, and additionality in setting these offset protocols in their nations and at the global stage. So we intend to continue this work and continue to refine our approach to these offset markets. And thanks so much again for having me.
Thank you. Thanks for that perspective on California, and I hope this is painting a picture for you that it's a mix of compliance and voluntary market incentives that are coming to the fore. And I'm really glad you raised Brazil, because obviously it'll be a big opportunity for all of us to support their COP next year. But earlier this week, their Senate passed the legislation for a national carbon market in Brazil. I think it has to go back to the lower house for a final approval, but hopefully that will be another like feather in our caps with ICBCN breakthrough and the 6.4 breakthrough earlier this week. But the trends are, we're turning a corner and the trends are improving. Okay, Frederick Teo here from Gen Zero in Singapore, fellow travelers with me on many occasions. But you can give us the private sector perspective on this, but from a really unique vantage point of Singapore emerging as a regional leader, as a thought leader, but also actually doing stuff on the ground. Tell us how you see the role of nature markets for Singapore, but also more broadly in the region.
Sure, thanks, Doug. So Singapore is a very small country. So when we think about an issue like climate change and climate action, the first premise must be that there needs to be international collaboration, because it's impossible for many of the smaller countries, especially those that are energy disadvantaged, to be able to get onto a net zero pathway just on their own, right? There isn't enough land to solarize. Even if you put solar panels across the entire country, it will be insufficient for others. So the importance of therefore having markets that can effectively and in a high trust manner trade environmental attributes, carbon products, or whatever it is, will be an important part of us being able to get onto a net zero journey. So I start from a process of just being very humble and recognizing our vulnerabilities and shortcomings in being able to achieve this. And I think Singapore is not alone. Now, therefore, we need to turn then to what will help us get to this net zero outcome. Now, clearly, as many of my panelists have said, nature is going to be a very important part of that conversation. And coming from Southeast Asia, that is obvious. But if I were to ask many of you and say, look, do you believe that nature is important? I believe all the hands will go on. But if I were to ask the audience right now and say, do you believe that the business case for commercial investment into nature solutions have been made? How many of you would agree? Less certain. Okay. Well, a sprinkling of hands. Not too bad. I was kind of like expecting nobody to put a hands up. Okay. No. But I think that is precisely the challenge, right? So in the past, when it comes to the work that Patricia and Conservation International and others are doing, there had been a far greater reliance on public finances or maybe philanthropic capital to be able to push that kind of work. But today we realize that the gap is so tremendous that you would need to be able to make a business case for commercial investment capital to go into nature as well. Then the question is really, why would commercial investors from somewhere halfway around the world put money into protecting forests in, say, Brazil or Costa Rica or Paraguay or Colombia, right? Or somewhere in Africa? Why would we do that? Now, clearly, commercial investors will need to seek some kind of a business logic and some kind of return, right? Now, oftentimes for many of these projects, there isn't any other economic value stream other than carbon credits. And so carbon credits provide an economic logic and rationale for why investors would be prepared to deploy substantial capital to protect natural assets. Then the question really is that, but how do you get value from these carbon credits? Well, clearly integrity is part of it, but there is actually a deeper point. Why do you need carbon credits? Value, I mean, like, of course, you can create an NFT on a picture and, do all kinds of funky stuff and then make people pay a lot of money. But the reality of it is that there must be some intrinsic value to why carbon credits exist. Now, for us, the way that we invest into the carbon markets is not to see that carbon credits are very it's just simply about offsetting carbon emissions. Rather, carbon credits are a way of directing financing into deserving underlying credits. Because the carbon credits must represent some carbon ton of underlying activity to mitigate or to avoid emissions or do something, right? So it is the activity that we're trying to support, not just the idea of having carbon credits to go to corporates to offset emissions. But that said, if the corporates were to spend money, you must give them a reason to spend that money. Offsetting emissions is one, and it has to be done in a high integrity way. And back to what Lord Sharma was saying, actually the corporates that actually buy carbon credits to offset emissions are twice as likely to actually undertake some fundamental decarbonization effort in their part. So there is actually a high correlation with interest in using carbon credits to actually doing something about it. And we all recognize that there must be a hierarchy of how we mitigate, right? That credits will come or offsets must come towards the end. That you ought to try and put something into make it fundamentally reduce it. Now, I would also want to close off at this point in time by saying that other than the commercial returns, nature investments are interesting for us because there are many powerful co-benefits to doing investments into nature. When I invest into technology solutions, right, it is very difficult to explore how that effort could directly benefit less developed communities. But when it comes to nature solutions, they oftentimes can, because many of the nature solution potential actually exists in developing countries, in communities that might be somewhat more disadvantaged or challenged, and we can actually do a lot of good. Now, the part that we need to recognize is that there needs to be a proper risk reward, because the cost of capital in many of these jurisdictions tend to be higher. And for us to be able to achieve a return over the cost of capital, that's always going to be a little bit more challenging. And I think you'll see some time later to explore how we are trying to overcome some of these challenges.
Thanks, Fred, and actually thank you for unveiling some other attributes of this, about the discussions on biodiversity or community benefits, and there is a broader panoply of benefits that come with nature-based projects. And I guess that leads me to, I want to come back to Lord Sharma and ask you, so we talked broadly about high integrity, and I think it's leading to what's the wisdom of an investment case that Fred opened up. As you think about it, what does high integrity mean, and what would it take for nature-based projects to reach that level where you'd say this is a wise investment?
So I would say, firstly, real additionality to be able to demonstrate that. Transparency. So we really want to see, what's behind these carbon credits. Thirdly, community benefit. And fourthly, a conservative approach. And the reason I say that is because, this is not a pure commodity at the end of the day, right? I mean, if I have a direct air capture machine, and I'm waiting for one of those to emerge, I can sort of suck a certain amount of carbon out and say, right, that's a precise number. I mean, this is more imprecise in terms of the amount of carbon removal that's going to take place. And therefore, I think, erring on the side of sort of a conservative approach on this is really important. If we can go get those four done, we're can start to rock and roll, basically.
Secretary Garcia, I'm gonna ask you the same question, although you're looking at it through the lens of what actually qualifies for compliance in California. What does it take for you and your agency to do something as wise enough investment to be accepted?
I think that the one missing piece, and I do want to mention a challenge, but of course, Echo Alex Sharma in the criteria that he just laid out, which I mentioned previously. But the enforceability is really critical for us in California, and that's challenging, of course, in jurisdictions that we don't control. And I think that's been seen a bit as maybe a barrier to entry, but something that we've tried to address flexibly through our tropical forest standard, which is not necessarily part of our formal program, but it is something that can be replicable. I also want to mention the challenge of permanence, which is another piece that I think is unique to California's approach. And I think the elephant in the room is the impact of wildfires and what that can mean. I think what we've seen in new forests and new growth is that they're a little less prone to burning, but that leaves us with a bit of a challenge in terms of conserving existing forested lands. And this is an area that has been of great concern to, as an example, the Yurok tribe in the northern reaches of our state in California, who've suffered the brunt of impacts of a lot of wildfires over the past decade or so, but who also use cultural burning as a method of managing fire risk. And so really thinking about building in the types of flexibility that you need to be able to continue to see the type of generation of growth of these nature-based solutions and entry to participation in these markets, while also making sure that it is as best it can be permanent and as well as enforceable.
Excellent. I'm glad you raised that question because I think it's one of the many topics that is vexing the negotiators here a bit. And maybe if it's okay, I'd like to draw this to a little bit of focus on the Article 6 topic. It's something that's a hot topic. By the way, is it getting warm in here for you guys? Because we're trying to simulate what 1.5 degrees means for the panel with the lights, but
I think we're close to 3 degrees.
3 degrees. So we've got to avoid this. But I would like to turn quickly to the questions around Article 6 and the potential that it may have for stimulating broader interest in nature. It's got a couple of pathways, one of which includes a pathway for use of independent standards. And I think probably in the United States, largely because of California's experience, California took advantage of some of the infrastructure that had built up in the voluntary market and uses some of those organizations for helping to implement the California accrediting programs. But here it looks like it's going to be a mix. We're giving countries choices on whether they bring projects through the 6.4 process or whether they cooperate more bilaterally or plurilaterally or potentially using existing standards. They're struggling a bit with these questions around permanence. But I'd like to kind of step back from all of that, like the esoteric detail, and maybe get a few comments about what the importance of that is, of the accounting framework that the presidency in Glasgow worked hard to elaborate and bring forward. We're counting on that to really deliver ultimately the structures that we need. But Fred, I think I'm going to start with you on this one about what do you see as the importance and the prospect of Article 6 and helping to be a part of this restoring of confidence in the market.
Yeah. So I go back to the original point about the importance of global cooperation. And that I think is the main benefit of getting us progress on Article 6. Because it provides the frameworks, the standards and the rules for governments and countries to actually collaborate with each other, right? So 6.2, 6.4. Now the main thing around Article 6 and having integrity in the process is actually not very different from the way that we think about integrity in the voluntary carbon markets. if I could add a little bit to what Lord Chandler has said, right, that beyond points around additionality, transparency, maybe information disclosure and the likes, I would suggest that it is important to understand what integrity is not in the first place. So oftentimes when we think about market integrity, we want absolute consistency. That the rules don't change, that you're very clear about your quality standards and all that. But if I were to just remind all of us, when most of us were going to school, there were 9 planets in the solar system. That when but our kids going to school now believe that there are 8. Yeah. Thanks. I beg you. It's very dangerous when I'm sitting next to a young lady. Okay, but the thing about it is that today there are only supposedly 8 planets circling the sun, right? But Pluto is still circling around the sun. The reality still exists, but due to a definitional change, we now say that there are 8 planets and not 9. So rules can change. But the idea really is that nobody questions the integrity, the legitimacy, and the authority of scientists to be able to sit around the room and say, look, I think that this is not quite a planet anymore. So the textbooks will change, and now there will be 8 planets, not 9. So I think that this is an important understanding around integrity. That integrity doesn't mean immutability, right? And therefore, it comes down to 2 other, I would suggest, 2 other factors that we need to focus on that I think has been a bit underappreciated. One is a question around authority. Who actually has the proper authority to make up the rules? It is a misunderstanding for us to imagine that the carbon markets today are absolutely. They're not. There are lots of standards out there. There are lots of guidelines and policies. In fact, too many acronyms for us to actually remember. But the truth about it is that who has the authority to say at the end of the day that this is actually accurate and good enough? To be honest, I don't think that what we want are overly conservative baselines. Because it is important to be conservative, but to be conservative is only because you cannot be accurate. And because you cannot be accurate, credibility is ensured by being conservative. But if you are actually accurate, you shouldn't be conservative, because when you layer buffer upon buffer upon buffer, what it makes is a much more difficult commercial case to invest. Because you're going to have so much set aside, you're going to have too much of a buffer pool, many things that cannot actually be done. So the question around authority and the ability to be accurate and to be good. The second thing is actually a question around legitimacy. So at the end of the day, where is the source of legitimacy to have that authority to say, at the end of the day, these are the rules and this is good enough? So this is the reason why I think we do see the importance of Article 6, because we are trying to get to a point of convergence between the voluntary carbon market and compliance market. I think that increasingly this distinction between voluntary and compliance is going to be meaningless, because the rules that are being set on the compliance market will have a knock-on impact on the way that we think about the voluntary market, right? So when a government whitelists particular project types for acceptability to, say, offset the carbon tax or whatever it is, surely that has an impact on what we think about acceptable project types in the voluntary market, right? So in a sense, it is that question around legitimacy, and I do think that governments at the end of the day, or supranational international organizations need to come in with that force of legitimacy to be able to stop the debates and get us focused on the big things and move on.
Lord Chalmers, I'd love to get your.
I just wanted to come back on something first. But by the way, Fred, when I was growing up, there were only 3 planets. Shows you my age. But look, I want to come back on this point on being conservative. Now, so I was a politician. Well, I guess I still am a politician in the House of Lords. But when you are a sort of frontline politician, very acutely aware of the scrutiny that comes from the media. Now, I know, Patricia, you were saying that the amount of scrutiny that carbon markets face from international media is out of sync with actually how big the carbon markets are. I get that, but the reason I think you need to start conservative is actually to build that support, because it's very, very easy, and I know this from sort of work that I've done. It's very easy for 1 or 2 people to start to question something that fundamentally is good and has integrity, and then suddenly those sort of question marks start. And if you are a listed company, you are constantly sort of watching out for your own reputation. And, if you've bought into some scheme and then somebody says, well, is this really right? Are you sort of overstating the value of this scheme? I think that's the sort of thing that you need to make sure there is complete confidence. And right, and maybe we start by being very conservative. Then over time, yeah, as the number of planets grow, we sort of move the goalposts a bit further.
Well, Sharma, perhaps as a very quick point in response to that, one quality that I think I also forgot to mention is actually the importance of trust. Like Edelman has this trust barometer, right? And typically, the trust in political leaders, sometimes in corporates and all that, is actually quite low. And that's the reason why, even as we are careful about going to the carbon markets and introducing a lot of financial jargon, we actually can be frightening a lot of the very important stakeholders that are in this space, because we are using technical jargon that people don't understand. And so it builds this degree of mistrust or misunderstanding. So actually, when you actually have a very high degree of trust in the people who are actually acting in this space, you are less likely to misunderstand their intentions. And so when mistakes happen, they are not always fatal.
Patricia, I want to thank you for raising your finger, because I was going to call on you, because I know CI is very closely following Article 6 negotiation, but also sees real potential in unlocking more trust and confidence. So give us a perspective.
Yeah, let me just jump on a couple of things that were said before. So when we are thinking about the carbon market, for whatever reason, the way that we understand our financial system trusts more a carbon capture solution that is not benefiting anyone. I mean, it will be benefiting the planet, but it will not benefit local communities and indigenous peoples, and definitely not nature. And we trust that more than a system that has been around for millions of years and has maintained the climate of the planet stable until we arrive, right? So philosophy aside, I understand why the mistrust happens. I understand that we have to be conservative, and I'm all in favor of that. But we have to start thinking about what are we really valuing. Now, let's go back to Article 6. I'm just gonna point to Steph in the back has this card. If you wanna take one of this, CI and the Nature Conservancy has produced a very simple, easy to read guideline on Article 6 that, because it was produced before the COP, it doesn't have the approval of the framework that happened on Monday, but it has enough clarity of the complexity of Article 6. Now, as you said, CI has been a huge advocate for really moving Article 6 forward, because we see that as an extraordinary opportunity to really position and elevate nature as a solution, as the solution that can be for climate. As I said before, nature cannot be seen as a second-class citizen in terms of the solutions for the climate crisis. It's by far a better solution because of the benefit to local communities and indigenous people, and because of the benefit to nature that is, again, the base of our and the foundation of our economy. So we see this movement and this decision as an incredibly positive signal of really incorporating the role that nature plays on resolving the climate crisis, but also helps us really ensure that we are setting up the foundations and the grounds for treating nature in the right way. I have to say that one of the concerns that we have with the way that it was approved on Monday, we are concerned that nature is being seen as this incredibly risky proposition that is not permanent. And I agree 100%, Secretary Garcia. We have to think about the permanence, especially given the status of the climate right now, right? I mean, things have changed. Nature is a victim of the climate crisis as well. But at the same time, we cannot make it so complicated that nature continues to be lagging as a solution. We have to figure out how the guidelines are going to help us really move nature into that space where it is really at the same level as the other solutions. And I'm not saying that we don't need carbon capture. We do need carbon capture. But Without nature, it is mathematically impossible for us to resolve the climate crisis and for us to have a survival. One more plug before I finish. Huge congratulations to at CBCM. CI, which has 2 members of the board as well, and we have been contributing to this. But I cannot thank you enough for pushing this forward, because this is a really, really good thing. It's going to help us consolidate and create that momentum that we really need, and building up truly the trust that this market has to have. So thank you.
Thank you. I want to move to a sort of a separate but related topic. And that is, there's some in this effort to improve, hold your microphones up a bit. That's, yeah, getting some feedback. Anyway, I'll set back a little. But I think one of the topics is whether we need to move more towards sectoral jurisdiction equivalent programs. It'd be great to get a little bit of a feel from the real world about the experiences thus far with those types of approaches. Do they bring higher integrity, higher trust and confidence, or are they a bridge too far in terms of the complexity and trying to address it at sort of a jurisdictional level? And Fred, maybe would you like to address this from a private sector perspective first, and then I'll move across to anyone on the panel that would like to speak to this jurisdictional aspect. By the way, I should say, it's not just being looked at in nature. This is certainly that the United States has got a lot of interest in for energy systems as well, although that too is pretty quite difficult.
Thank you. Right. So conceptually, obviously, we must be supportive of a jurisdictional approach to some of these projects. And the critical problem that jurisdictional approaches are trying to solve is the problem of leakage. So what you don't want is a situation where you're working on a project to protect the forest or to shut down a coal plant, and then another coal plant pops up somewhere else in the country, or some other forest gets deforested somewhere else in the country, right? So jurisdictional approaches tend to solve for this problem of leakage. But that said, the ability to actually set up such a system of accounting and monitoring and to ensure that the surveillance and all that is done properly across a country, especially a very big country, is difficult. And so the question before us as private sector investors is, do we wait for such a perfect system to emerge? And to date, I think there are no jurisdictional REDD+ projects for us to actually work on. So do we wait for the perfect system to come? Or do we say, look, to the extent that we can try and ensure integrity and additionality, especially if you're starting early, you're going to be able to make a much more outsized impact and worry about the marginal impact when there are so many of these projects already in place. So do we start first? That is the main question that we ask ourselves. Now, to the extent that META standards like the ICBCM is able to give us some degree of cover for the integrity of such a project, that would be great. And we also rely, furthermore, on carbon ratings. So carbon rating companies today are much more developed and sophisticated and mature in their approaches. And they will also give us a sense at the project level around the quality of a particular project. And that gives us confidence to act. I would close off by having one quick point. You know, we can sometimes get trapped by trying to get a lot of data, a lot of details, a lot of nth degree type of distractions around a project. So I'm reminded that during the Vietnam War, US Defense Secretary was actually, with great faith in modeling and computing and everything. Post the supercomputer, apparently, I don't know whether this story is totally true, but it's quite instructive. Post the supercomputer question, when is the US going to win the Vietnam War? And the answer that came out was 4 years ago. Okay? So I think that we also have to be sometimes very, very careful that as we overindulge ourselves in false precision, and trying to count every single thing to get to a right answer, believing that the more numbers I throw into a model, the more accurate it becomes. And as a financial company, I'll tell you, it's not true. It's rubbish in, rubbish out. And that you have got to try and understand that a model is, at the end of the day, trying to give you a representation of reality, but it is not reality itself.
Doris, please give us a view of how ICBCM is looking at it.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, back to our big announcement today, some of the methodologies we approved are jurisdictional REDD methodologies. So we have looked at the issues around leakage, et cetera, and we have concluded that it is robust. So of course, this is the beginning, and we will continue to work on it, and that space will evolve. But it's a very important space. You know, we also expect our jurisdictional methodologies to make their way into national forest policies. For example, there's going to be a way to think about if you have jurisdictional methodology, but you still have individual red projects, how will the nested work, how will that fit all together? So there is going to be continuous focus on that, but it's absolutely critical. And as Frederick said, we can give assurance that what is in the methodology is robust. Will it be evolved and become better? Of course, and we know better, we will do better.
Excellent.
I'm just gonna jump super quickly on this because I think, you know, let me go back to what Alok started with. Let's get on with it. And that means really looking at the combination of the jurisdictional and the project, right? I mean, my wonderful team came up with this analogy. Like, think about a chocolate chip cookie, right? Where you have the chocolate chips being the project, and we want those projects to continue to go. And then you have the jurisdictional as the cookie. We need those to be going in parallel. Again, the volume, and really thinking about how do we move this forward and how do we learn more from it? How do we evolve it? But get on with it because it's 30% of the solution and we're not moving fast enough.
Very good. Okay. See if that helps. Okay. What I want to do, we just got time for a final round. And, it's been a really interesting conversation. Cut across a number of the key topics that I think are that are challenging people right now, but also providing investment interest. I'd like to get a sense of let's see if I'm going to use this one instead. How's that? Okay, so what I want to do is just run down the panel. We'll start with Fred and work our way down. But what's the greatest opportunity that you see in the coming year? Because next year could be the Nature Cup. I don't know. It's in Brazil. It seems like that's one of their top interests. Yeah, he's not so sure. But we're going to build up to you. You'll be able to tell us the answer. But what do you see as the biggest opportunity for nature and markets in the coming year? We do have some win in our sales from this week. What do you see as the biggest opportunity?
I think the biggest opportunity for us in nature is to be able to strengthen the business case for investing in nature by perhaps appealing to nature project or working on prioritizing nature projects that don't just exclusively depend on carbon. It is not difficult to make the business case. Today, if bee populations are actually affected in the United States, we are talking about billions of dollars of value in agriculture that is. It is not difficult to quantify the value of nature, to be honest. So therefore, if we are able to think about investing into nature solutions beyond just saying that forestry conservation and expand the aperture to say we are talking about sustainable forestry, we are talking about sustainable agriculture, we are talking about sustaining jobs, where we make, for example, sustainable rice farming that uses less water so that water-stressed regions and communities can continue to produce rice. These are going to be very helpful ways of shaping the narrative a little bit differently and getting people excited about the potential and business opportunities around nature.
Thank you. Again, this has been such a wonderful panel. Thank you for pulling this together. Fully co-sign into so many of the comments that have been made, especially just increasing the amount of deployment of the solution. I mean, in California, we're looking at a number of CCUS projects as part of our solution in California. And would we not want to see more forestry and nature-based solutions as part of that? Absolutely. And I fully agree that we need to expand our ability as much as we can as governmental entities, and in our case, from the jurisdictional lens to ensure that that happens. And I think one of the most promising things that we have moving forward in the lead up to COP30 is that I think the right people are finally at the table in thinking this through. And that includes people who stand to benefit the most and addressing kind of the issue of integrity and trust and distrust, which we have dealt with quite a bit in California with the covered entities in our Cap and Trade program who have most participated in the offset programs itself, is we have to have that level of trust in the area of benefit for the nature-based solution and in the area of impact. Not so much a leakage issue, but at the direct source of impact. I think that's the other area where we see the most distrust, particularly from communities that are most heavily impacted by heavy pollution sources in California. We want to continue to see that improve and really look forward to continuing this discussion and deploying more of this as we lead up to COP30.
I think the biggest opportunity for nature could actually be Article 6. And I know we're still waiting for guidance to really understand and make it so that the people implementing it can implementing it because it's clear. But I think what it might create, and we have talked about trust and integrity, and we have done so much work that we believe we are now at a stage to create this trust that countries will just realize the big opportunity and change the tech into project developers. Please, you're welcome here. We know what you're doing. We have the right governance and legal framework and enforceability. We help you, and you help us to create jobs, to create more benefits, and maybe even create some income under Article 6 trade. So I think really this Article 6 can be the biggest opportunity for nature.
I feel that we are at a point where we are taking off again, that we have a second chance almost. Look, my first climate COP was Milan a long time ago. And at that point, I remember being part of the negotiation team for the Ecuadorian government and pushing for forests to be included in the text because we were nowhere, right? I mean, that was forest, never mind nature. We've come a long way. And yes, we had a hiccup 2 years ago, mainly because of a handful of bad apples, I would say. I will continue to say that. We have now a new chance. And what I want to see at the Nature COP next year in Pará is really elevating the role that nature has played on resolving these issues as a solution that is actually ensuring the right access of finance to local communities and indigenous peoples, the restoration and the maintenance of these incredible ecosystems that our survival depends on, but also, how this is becoming an opportunity for the private sector and how this can actually be something that stops depending on public money and philanthropy and becomes part of an ecosystem of the financial sector that is truly rewarding and recognizing the role that nature plays for climate, for people, and for our survival. So what I see is really the second wind, this huge chance for us to keep it pushing and with the new standards, build up the trust that this is the solution. Yes, be conservative, but get going with it because we have to build up that volume and that momentum. So in Pará, we can come and say, okay, we're moving into the right direction.
Well, Article 6, just get it done.
Thank you.
Given the set of vetting stuff, first of all, I want to, in closing, thank all the panelists for helping us tell the story better about all the richness and all of the potential really in market-based cooperation to use nature as part of the solution for its rightful place. I want to close with just a quick story that is a personal story, but is to give a little context. When I was in government, it was in the last century. in the Clinton administration. One of my jobs when I was at the White House was giving out awards to the pilot projects of what we called AIJ back then. And one of them was a forest protection project in Malaysia, in the Sabah. I gave this award and thought, you know, I want to go there someday. So I got to Malaysia after I visited you in Singapore earlier this year. And I ran into a researcher at a carbon market reception, as you do. And I said, where do you work? It's like, it's a British researcher. He's like, well, I run PhD programs in Savannah. I said, really? I gave an award to a project in the late 90s. You probably wouldn't have heard of it. He said, what was it, the New England Electric Project? And I said, well, absolutely it was. I gave an award to the project developer that ran this New England Electric Project. It was a company that didn't have obligation to. It set a voluntary target to stabilize its emissions at 1990 levels by 2000. But it also said it would do an additional 10% by buying international credits and it went to the forestry market. And I said, that's the one. I said, what's the story? Is it still there? What happened? He said, oh, it totally worked. That's what the answer is. It totally worked. The birds and bees and bunnies came back. The forest is thriving, and it is probably the most researched project in the world because of the data set that it got way back then to set the baseline, and that it's been continually searched. So anybody that wants to go there with me later, sometime next year when I come to visit you next, yep, we got to go and see this project that works. But I sense that CI would tell me that's tip of the iceberg, that it works all over the place. So the potential is vast. It is part of the solution. And this is the community that's going to make it happen as long as they just get it done. So thank you. And we'll close this out. Please have a great talk. Thank you.